He was a morbidly obese surgeon destined for an operating table and an early death. Now he's a rebel MD who is fabulously fit and fighting to make America healthy again. This is Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia.
I'm reading from your book, Timeless Youth. Page 145 says this: my prime dream is to empower individuals worldwide to greater levels of health and wellness through education and individualized processes, resulting in the fuller expression of their innate potential. I mean, that's packed right there. This will lead to a transformational shift in the world's viewpoint toward health, wellness, disease, and symptoms. I will, with others, accomplish this through a first-rate adult educational program, globally located clinics, and thousands upon thousands of educated healers dutifully and skillfully expressing their craft. The result will be an increased quality of life, millions upon millions of healthier beings. Holy smokes. Phil, who is this guy that you asked to join us today? That's a humongous vision.
I think, that probably tells you why I'm honored to have Crippen, Dr. Jeff Crippen on the show today. That's why I was so interested in connecting with him. And, whatever you believe about how we come across each other these days on this, vast digital world we exist in, the forces brought us together because, anyone who's a follower of this show will know that mission statement sounds a lot like my mission statement. And so really excited to talk to Dr. Crippen. Jeff is a chiropractic in Texas. I think he's now, I'm thinking offhand, the third, maybe fourth chiropractic that we've had on, and really excited to dive into that vision and that mission statement with him. But Jeff, why don't you start by giving our audience a little bit of your background and how you got to where you are today.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Jack. Pleasure to be here and appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to, collaborate and talk with like-minded individuals is awesome. So my story, similar to a lot of your guests, is a personal story that brought me here. Only for me, it started much before I became a doctor. When I was 6 years old, I was getting blood work, and I remember getting the blood work done, and the lady at the front desk, like, she opens that little plastic window that they hide behind and said, you give them the papers, and they, before they called me back, she said, "Son, I know what you're going to be when you get older." And I said, "What's that?" She said, "You're going to be a doctor." I said, "Why would you think I'm going to be a doctor?" She goes, "Because I can't read a darn thing you just wrote on this paper." So that was about as close as anyone ever thought I was going to be a doctor. So my story started when I was 6 years old, and it started getting headaches, and then they progressively got worse. And 6, 7 years old, and what do you do? You go to start taking children's Tylenol, children's Motrin, children's Advil. Eventually, when that didn't help, went to a pediatrician, and then you start doing some stronger ibuprofen and then some prescription medications, and the headache kept getting worse. So eventually, a couple years in, I still have the headaches, and they're getting progressively worse. So that's a potential red flag symptom in a child. They want to rule out things that are worse, like a tumor, basically swelling of the brain, fluid buildup. So they wanted to rule out things worse. So I did a CT scan. They found something in my brain, didn't know what it was, then did an MRI. It turned out what the mass they found was what's called a benign arachnoid cyst, but a small non-cancerous lesion, kind of a genetic in origin, at least that's what's commonly thought. And I remember sitting down with the surgeon, and the surgeon said, I don't think you're a candidate for brain surgery, which is what they were looking at with a lesion of the brain. And I remember sitting in the room being, disappointed. It was kind of grown up in that whole medical idea that you go to the doctor and you trust him. And I was actually, it sounds insane to me now, but I was hoping they were going to do surgery, just because you start dealing with chronic pain. You're desperate for anyone to point to something on an X-ray, on blood work, on a CT or an MRI at this point and say, there's the problem. I know what to do. Let's take care of it. So, but thankfully, he did not. So then it didn't help me get any closer to figuring out why I had the headache. So that launched me on a bit of a journey. Went through the medical system for another few years, then actually searched for answers outside the medical system with chiropractic and rebuilding my body with holistic functional nutrition. And, I basically went through that journey to try to heal myself first as a patient, and then went to school with no interest in becoming a doctor or healthcare practitioner. Did a couple internships in college and just found them unfulfilling. So I majored in Spanish and went to chiropractic school. And that was graduated about 10 years ago. We got to practice north of Dallas, Texas. So that's what brought me here, or that's what brought me here today.
Well, I want to go back to your book called Timeless Youth. I don't always do this when we have a guest on who's got a book, but I read your book, and I was fascinated by not just your story, but the illustrations you used, the examples you used to illustrate the situation we're in with medicine.
Yeah.
The Titanic problem, the Yellowstone problem, the Model A principle, the quantum principle, and the Olympic strength principle. Give us some context around those. What is the Titanic problem as it relates to health?
I think that's a great place to start, and probably something to echo something similar to other guests you guys have had on your program. But I started looking at the medical system and just seeing we have incredibly bright doctors, incredibly loving and caring nurses, and some of the best educational institutions in the world. And the amount of research and technology, I mean, just the fact that I could get an MRI is just incredible technology. I mean, the amount of, not to get into PET scans and, ultrasound and all the incredible medical imaging and technology that we have. And yet it's the single leading cause of death. According to Gary Null in a study called Death by Medicine, killing over 1 million people per year.
You better expand on that a little bit, because not everybody's gonna have followed you there.
Yeah. So
what is the leading cause of death?
So the traditional medical care. So, heart disease will kill about 700,000 people a year, give or take, in the United States. Cancer is about 600,000. But Gary Null and some of his team is a PhD. He published a study in Life Extension, and it was called Death by Medicine. And he went through the causes of death, including things like correctly prescribed drugs and incorrectly prescribed drugs, and what's called nosocomial infections, which are infections you acquire in the hospital, and iatrogenic, which is Greek for, the doctor screwed up, right? Or something bad happened. Right, which is basically what it means. And and bed sores and malnutrition in nursing homes, and you go through all of the potential complications of traditional medical care. And he said it was somewhere, give or take 700,000 to 1 million people a year. This is 15 years ago, maybe 20, is when this study came out, in terms of the cause of death. So he said, so it made me really think, and actually there's been some real interesting research about when doctors go on strike. Like, doctors isn't an easy profession to go on strike. They tend not to like doctors going on strike, but they have on occasion in parts of the world. And typically it's with the proviso of they can go on strike from elective procedures and still have to provide life-saving care. Well, what they found is typically when doctors go on strike, and there's been half a dozen, or so instances of that, the death rate typically stays the same or goes down. So when doctors go on strike, less people die. Now, obviously, they're going on strike from their elective surgeries, not the life-saving emergency care, which the medical system is fantastic at. So it makes you wonder. So I tried to think, how can I wrap my head around having some of the best technology, having some of the brightest minds. And then you start thinking of how to make sense of that. And the analogy that came to my mind was the Titanic. The Titanic, when it left port, was the largest ship in the world. It had the most advanced wireless transmitters. It was dubbed unsinkable. And for that reason, they didn't bother with things like lifeboats and, some of the other ideas. And so I thought that was, a good analogy for this. And then the extension of that was, so what is the solution here? Are we trying to fix the Titanic and stop it from bailing water? Or are we, creating the Carpathia, or are we creating the lifeboat, which is going to pick up the survivors and carry them the rest of the way? And I decided to focus my attention on, creating that lifeboat and what would that look like? So, similar to what you're doing there, Dr. Philip, is focusing on the solution and kind of stepping outside that system to kind of prevent people from ever getting on the Titanic, right? The best way to survive the Titanic is never get on it. And then, so that's kind of the background of the Titanic, because, when it left port, it was unsinkable. And 4.5 days later, it was sunk, and it happened fast. So the question is, how did that technology, how was that all wasted? And I think it comes down to, blind spots and misperceptions. It was ultimately that idea, and that's kind of what I go through in the book, is it's the blind spots on the whole idea that Titanic was unsinkable, because there was, in the 10 years previously, it was the most dangerous or most deadly crash, basically, of any boat crossing the Atlantic. And there were other boats crossing that same time at night, including the Titanic sister ship, the Olympic, was going to be within eyesight to pick up passengers, but they said, don't come this way to save the survivors, because they thought it would be too traumatic to see the identical twin ship of the Titanic picking up people after it just sunk. So anyway, there's a lot of traffic going on in the area. So how did that one sink? So you go through the mistakes that happened on the Titanic, but ultimately it came around from this idea of a hubris, of thinking it was unsinkable and not bothering to look at the consequences. So when I look at the medical system, I think there's some underlying misperceptions that are causing us to have this incredible technology, these great doctors, these incredible facilities, but we're getting poor results. And the poor results are telling us, hey, something's wrong. Let's investigate what that is.
Yeah, it's such an interesting perspective that you took there. You can debate the figures, and some people say medical error is the third leading cause, and what do you count? And in many ways, the same things that prolong life in certain situations ultimately, can lead to death. I mean, we haven't cured death yet, you need to die for something. But I agree. And, again, this is a lot of what I often go back to and talk about, is we cannot be satisfied with the results we're getting from the medical system today. And if you focus on the US alone, and you say, we spend more money on healthcare than any other country, and yet we don't get the results you would want from that. Our lifespan has actually been shortening. Again, we're not getting the results. And when I look at something specifically like heart disease and say, we have been fighting a war against heart disease for 70 years, and heart disease is still the #1 killer, we got a problem here. And I think all too often in medicine, like you said, that hubris gets in the way. We can't even conceive that what we might be doing, and it's well intended, but what we might be doing, may not be having the intended effects, and may even be doing harm, more harm than good in many situations. So I think it's a great way to frame the problem that we're facing. And what I especially like about your book, and the stuff you talk about, is it's not just here's the problem. You're actually thinking about, how do we change it? How do we build a better Titanic, as you said? Maybe to step back a little bit and talk about you know, because like I said, I think you're the third or fourth chiropractic we've had on, but I don't remember how much we really got into, you know, the philosophical underpinnings, let's call it, of
Sure.
chiropractic, and how, you know, traditionally that was thought to be sort of outside the medical system, an alternative, you know, but increasingly, I think it has applicability and can be integrated with, you know, the allopathic system. And that might be where, you know, we find some new answers and some new approaches. So what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Yeah, so chiropractic probably goes back to, you know, thousands of years, back to the Egyptians. There's some, you know, indications that it existed for a while. It's credited with its modern founding in the late 1800s by a gentleman, D.D. Palmer. So that's kind of when it came back, and it was kind of developing along a similar line with osteopaths or osteopathy. So very similar in their philosophy. Chiropractors adjust the spine because to free pressure on the nerves and basically have the brain be able to communicate to the heart and the lungs and the muscles and the organs and the tissues of the bodies without interference, right? The whole idea is the body, one of the basic philosophical underpinnings of chiropractic is the body needs no help, just no interference. So how can we remove the interference from having the body do the healing itself? Osteopathy was very similar when they did the manipulations. I believe it was A.T. Still. I think he was maybe the founder of osteopathy or evolved very early on. He basically said it's the blood vessels that were the most important. And when they would manipulate the spine or do the manipulations, it was to ensure optimum blood flow. Well, ultimately, what do we know? Well, most times when you do dissection, the artery goes with the nerve and the vein. So they're all there together at the same time. So it's a little bit of a slight bit of distinction. There's obviously a difference there, but two different ways of looking at a similar idea, which is how do you get optimum nutrient flow, whether it's in the sense of nerve conduction or oxygen flow to the body. So where osteopathy and chiropractic diverged, so there was a legal case between chiropractic and the American Medical Association that was basically for libel and slander and all kinds of stuff that went all the way to the Supreme Court in the 70s. And basically chiropractic ended up, you know, prevailing in that, but there was a ton of animosity between the medical profession and chiropractic. At the same time, osteopathy just kind of joined in. They said, hey, we'll be part of that system. Chiropractic, or I guess whoever that was at the time, kind of fought to stay separate. And that legal battle went on for 10 years. Anyway, there's a lot of lingering, or, you know, predates my time mostly, but a lot of lingering kind of animosity, or was especially 20, 30 years ago. But I think now looking at a healthcare system where you have different practitioners with specialties within that, and the idea that chiropractic can add something to that perspective is very valuable, and I think can be super helpful, especially in this holistic or wellness area where you guys operate. And in terms of one of the basic philosophical underpinnings for chiropractic that really resonated for me is the body has the ability to heal itself, right? We cut ourselves, we hit our knee, right? The body, you get swelling, you get redness, you get heat, you get increased blood flow, you get some pain and loss of function, and then ultimately it heals, right? So the body has the ability to heal. So the question is, what can I do? So I guess what resonated with me, to go back, is as a chiropractor, really looking at my job of how can I maximize the healing of the body, instead of coming in and saying I have, you know, I'm going to be the one to do the healing or cause that effect. What can I do to work with the body, work with its natural healing impulse from a chiropractic perspective, from a nutrition perspective, are the two main areas I work on, to give the body the nutrients it needs to take away the toxins or the stressors that may be contributing to it not working as well as it could. And then obviously through the adjustment to ensure optimum nerve function, kind of brain, spinal cord, which ultimately feeds all the organs, muscles, tissues in the body.
You're mute, Jack.
I try to be a good co-host, and then I screw it up technologically. I'm interested in this whole idea of, I'd like you to personalize it.
Yeah.
So you've got this Titanic metaphor for allopathic medicine. How did that intersect with your experience?
Yeah, good question. So I kind of came up with this after my experience, but how it fits with it is, I felt like I kind of lived that. I mean, you would go to, I went to the place that called themselves the Mayo Clinic for headaches, and you would see the doctor for, 3 to 5 minutes, and you do a 2-hour appointment, and you go through all this stuff. And at the end, I just felt like they didn't see me as a whole person. They couldn't really understand what was going on with me. It was kind of a one size fits all solution of that of basically take 2 and call me in the morning, or take 2 and we'll see you in 3 to 6 months. And throughout that 10 to 15 years I had those headaches, I never once had a doctor tell me why I had the headache. And even, I'm 7, I'm 13, I'm 15, I'm 18 going through this time. And even at that age, I had this idea, if they can't even tell me what the problem is, how can they fix it? Right? I mean, so there's a couple major classifications of headaches. Headaches can be caused by, hundreds of different things, right? If you have a girl on her cycle who has a headache, that can be one thing. If you have a high school football player or soccer player who has a headache after the game, could be post-concussion. Obviously, if you have a college-age kid have a headache on a Sunday morning after a late night on a Saturday night, that could be a different thing. If you have somebody, with a sinus issue going on. So, I mean, we can go on and on with the different causes of headaches. But they kind of group them into migraines, traditional migraines, then they have cluster headaches, tension headaches are kind of the main classifications. It goes into some other ones, but what they diagnosed me as is what's called a migraine variant, which, as the doctor explained it to me, was kind of like the other category. Like I didn't fit in one of the first 3. And they also said part of it was a rebound headache, because they told me to take ibuprofen at that time every 4 to 6 hours when I had a headache. And I had a headache at its worst for 2 years. So nonstop, every moment, every day for 2 years. So you can imagine I was taking a lot of ibuprofen. I don't remember. I was curious to go back and look at my liver enzymes at that time, or just like see what was going on with my body. But, they explained to me that, in my early teens or mid-teens, I probably had a chemical dependency to the ibuprofen. Or just, my body became an addition to that. And they said, they talked to me about basically withdrawal symptoms coming off the drug. So I feel like I was, living in a system with incredible technology, incredible promise, incredibly, well-intentioned people. But I felt like the care I was getting, basically my headaches continued to get worse and worse. And I just felt myself struggling for answers. And then you go to you talk to people and they're like, oh, do you know, coffee can cause your headaches. I was like, I'm 12, it's not, it's not too much coffee. And then other people say coffee is good for your headaches. And I was like, I'm still 12. And then 4 years later, it's red wine can help. It's okay, I'm 16. I don't know how my parents are going to feel about that. And other people say, well, you could be getting it from red wine. And it's like, well, not an issue either. So, then you start grasping at straws, trying to find stuff. It was a very, disparate kind of landscape. And, the idea of one of the first things I did was cut out sugar from my diet, cut out a lot of processed dairy as well. And you kind of work through what it means to, eat more whole foods. And at that time, a lot of the sugar-free options in the health food store it's a very different world 20 plus years ago, 25 years ago. And then most of the stuff didn't taste that good, and you're trying to figure out what to do. So anyway, once you step outside that medical system, it was just like, I'm not gonna say like blackness or confusion, but just like an uncharted territory. So I just felt like it was a very difficult experience to kind of sort what works and what doesn't, because there's a lot of stuff out there. And it's basically spent, years kind of searching through what actually works and what doesn't. And that was kind of my experience after kind of stepping off that Titanic.
And where, I guess, talk a little bit more about how nutrition came into the picture for you, because, whether you're talking about chiropractics that are focused on spinal manipulation, or you're talking about, osteopathic doctors that are focused on prescribing medications and, doing procedures, it oftentimes gets lost as, what we eat has an impact on our health. And, let
Sure.
food be thy medicine, which, traces back to Hippocrates and probably before. But, that's oftentimes forgotten today. So where in the process, both for you personally and you as a practitioner, did you kind of become more cognizant of most of these problems are related to the food that we're eating?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. So as on my own personal story, it started when I was 13 years old, and then I'll connect it up into philosophy and chiropractic kind of as the second part of your question there. But so you're just going to, I went to someone who did Chinese herbs, and then I went to someone who acupuncture, and then somebody, tried healing magnets, and then this is all at while trying prescription medications and going to see doctors, and you're just trying, just grabbing at straws, trying to figure things out. So what I found early on is when I would get an adjustment, I would get some symptomatic relief. So if I had a headache that was a 7 out of 10, it would get down to a 4 out of 10, which was helpful, but not really what I wasn't getting the headache to go away. And two, I didn't feel like I was addressing the root cause of why it was there in the first place. So I went, eventually ended up at a chiropractor who focused a ton on nutrition. And we started, his philosophy was to rebuild the body, piece by piece using whole food nutrition, and actually started with the heart and started with rebuilding the heart through a couple different ways. But on the first day, he said, I remember him telling me at 13 years old, I want you to not eat sugar and I want you to get off dairy. And I remember looking at him lying on the table saying, so what's left?
What else
and
is
like,
there?
yeah, and not really understanding what that means, and even asking the question like, are eggs considered dairy? Just like that level, because they're kind of in the same section at the grocery store. So that was like my level of knowledge at that point, was trying to figure it out. And then through that, I mean, that was probably 25 years ago. Now I would certainly add, gluten basically to that list, where that was a much smaller issue 25 years ago, or I was much less aware of it. I'd say that 25 years ago. So that was that. And, if you asked a question about kind of the history of chiropractic, we've kind of there, you're in school, or you talk to colleagues, and that some will say nutrition's fundamentally important, which is kind of where I fall on that. And others will say it really doesn't matter. All you need to do is, some chiropractors, all you need to do is adjust them. And, that's great. So you have conversations about it. And I think part of the idea is, when the chiropractors were just adjusting them 80 years ago or 100 years ago, you can make assumptions about the diet somebody was eating, right? You can make assumptions about a cup of spinach actually was a cup of spinach, and the genetically modified foods didn't really exist. And people ate on average 3 to 5 pounds of sugar instead of 150 to 180 pounds of sugar, right? And if the three of us don't eat much, that means there's a bunch of people, at least 3 other people, eating 300 pounds of sugar plus to bring out the balance, right? So I think you can make assumptions back then that I'm not sure you can now. So how that, and to answer your second part of that question, how does that show up in my practice? Pretty much every first visit, and anybody looking from a holistic standpoint on the nutritional side, there's a series of common food allergens that we might work through. The most common being certainly sugar, dairy, corn, soy, would certainly be at the top of that list, and then kind of going through some other ones as well. But it's something I think that's really worthwhile evaluate. And then I think equally important when you're talking about diet is not just what to take out, but also what to add back in. And kind of, Weston A. Price, his kind of ideas, basically didn't found a single purely vegetarian culture in the whole world as he traveled around. So there's definitely ways to do it with more or less vegetables and more or less meat. And there's different ways to do it around that. But returning to some version of that whole food based diet that has some clean quality protein, lots of healthy fats, and then some good quality vegetables. And then depending on someone's ability to handle blood sugar and things like that, then you'd look at fruit and some other things around that to kind of fill in the edges and kind of customize things to someone. So focusing on what we're stepping away from generally, and then what we're growing up. And then it depends on what's going on with somebody. So like, I'll give you one example, like, beets and beet leaves happen to be probably one of the single most important foods for gallbladder function. Anybody who's got a gallbladder issue, beet and beet leaves are the number one food for that. So that would be something to add back in on that. And then you start looking at, different things that might be going on with someone and building a diet or a set of nutrient profiles that would be specific for them, depending where they're at and what health challenges they're trying to solve.
There's been probably, what are we up to, Phil? 90 guests. We probably had 90 guests I could have asked this question of, and I don't know why I didn't, but the way you stated how you address the common food problems triggered this. You said at foods that I'm paraphrasing here, foods that typically cause problems, gluten, corn, soy. There were 5.
Sugar and
Sugar.
Processed dairy sometimes. Yeah.
Okay, well, dairy was the one I wanted to ask about. The
Sure,
sugar
yeah.
I understand, the soy I understand, the corn I understand, the gluten I understand, but what's with dairy? What's the story with dairy?
So I'm very much open to the idea that raw dairy can be quite helpful for someone. So raw, unpasteurized dairy. And not everyone has an issue with it. The most common symptoms you'll see with dairy allergies are breathing, respiratory issues, so chronic sinus issues, chronic lung, asthma issues. You'll see that. I see changes in bowels, constipation, and diarrhea. And then skin issues, kind of any different kind of dermatitis. Those are kind of the most common symptoms of what will manifest for a dairy intolerance or allergy.
But why?
So,
what is it? What's going on with the dairy? I know our wheat has been genetically modified. I know the corn is just, we can go on. And soy, I understand.
Yeah.
Sugar, I understand. But what's going on with the cows? What's wrong
what
with
is
our
going on with the
cows?
cows? Yeah, so I'm in small town Texas, so I'm surrounded by cows. I live about an hour outside of Dallas, and there's probably more cows than people within about a 10-mile radius of me. So I'm answering it for them and for you. So I think a couple of the issues that show up with dairy. So it's the term pasteurization comes from Louis Pasteur, which basically means to cook it, right? They heat it up. The benefit of that is they're killing off the bacteria. That's how it's marketed, makes it more shelf stable. The downside of that is it denatures protein. That's the definition of what pasteurization does. So it changed the shape and the configuration of the protein.
I'm the resident everyman.
Yeah,
denatured protein.
Good.
Thank you. What does that mean?
So it changes protein. It changes the shape of the protein, so the body doesn't recognize it.
Oh.
So if you looked at a protein,
it doesn't look like the kind of thing your body can use to your body.
It looks foreign.
So therefore your body treats it as
foreign and reacts to it. So it means if you looked at,
you mean it stimulates the autoimmune system to treat it as an invader, as a hostile.
Generally, the immune system will, the immune system will trigger reaction from the immune system. So basically, if you looked at a protein from just straight out of the cow, raw milk, which is basically unpasteurized, unhomogenized, and then, or if you looked at stuff you can buy on the store, the proteins will be different because they'll be denatured is the word I use, but basically means that we change the shape and configuration of the protein, making it more likely to cause an allergic response in the person. And I'll tell you, and the way to test it for anyone on here is, go off, if you're not sure, if you have lung issues or breathing difficulties or asthma or sinus issues or constipation or loose bowels, or any skin issues, get off all dairy, say a couple weeks, but even if you gave me 5 days and then have as much as you want on day 6, what I can tell you is on day 7, you'll know, right? You'll know, and you can just listen to your body to kind of see what that is. Now, there can be more finer and exact methods of spotting a food allergy or intolerance, but just big picture, take it out of your body for 5 days, have as much as you want on day 6, and you'll know on day 7. But basically it has to do with it basically sets off the alarms of the immune system because it's a different shape than normal.
But one of the interesting things that I have found around dairy, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is that sometimes it's not actually the dairy per se, it's the underlying gut issues that are allowing those proteins to cross a barrier that once you heal the gut, and the gut inflammation and that leaky gut, people who weren't able to tolerate dairy can go back to dairy because, again, it wasn't really the dairy per se, it was the gut problems that are allowing those proteins to cross that barrier.
For sure. And I would tell you, I would 100% agree with what you're saying there, Dr. Philip. And that is definitely an option. And basically what you're describing is, leaky gut, right? You're describing those junctions get bigger. And instead of those proteins breaking down into little Lego bits, we call them amino acids, but breaking all the way down to the individual Lego pieces and going across one by one, they go across in groups. And that's more likely to trigger an allergic reaction. And I've it's not an issue with every patient for sure. And I'm open to the idea of dairy, especially raw milk and raw cheese and things like that being a health food. But I have found some people just don't tolerate dairy no matter what. But certainly one of the things you're working through, especially with somebody with multiple allergies or a lot of inflammation in the body, is you have to differentiate. Is this a dairy issue? Is this a digestive issue? Whether it's leaky gut or whether it's a hydrochloric acid, is the stomach making acidifying the stomach enough to start the protein digestion in the stomach, so you can functionally work your way back and look at what the issue is. So you're right to say it's simplistic to say dairy is the issue if that test is positive, but it does give you a few more things to look at, including stomach digestion, protein digestion, maybe even gallbladder, which has to do with fat digestion, leaky gut, and then you can kind of start working back, like functionally from there to kind of see what's going on.
Well, that probably a good segue to the Yellowstone principle. Talk about the Yellowstone principle.
Yeah, so the Yellowstone principle, so this comes from basically Yellowstone. It's the 2.2 million square acre park in over parts of 3 different states. And what happened is they had a problem with wolves. And basically the problem with the wolves was they were eating the cattle. And some of the ranchers, going back to cows, the ranchers weren't that happy that their cattle were being eaten by wolves. So through the 20s and 30s and fair enough. Yeah. So they got the Park Service to get all the wolves out of Yellowstone. So over, the 20s and 30s, 40s, they killed or extinguished, got rid of all the wolves from Yellowstone. Fast forward 50 years.
Seems like a good plan.
Exactly. Yeah. The ranchers were happy, and the cows that weren't eaten, I assume they were quite happy as well.
And what I found fascinating, I don't want to steal your thunder, but what I found fascinating was, I think you said in the book, it was only 137 wolves.
Yeah. So I think that's the number.
A minuscule number of wolves.
Yeah. And it gets amazing. So then so I'll jump ahead, and then we're going to reintroduce the wolves, and it'll be about 25 or something that'll get reintroduced, to 27. But you're right, in a 2.2 million acre national park, one of the biggest, I think it might be the biggest in the world, that spans 3 different states. So, I mean, it's just massive. But after they got rid of the wolves, fast forward 20, 30, 40, 50 years, there was an explosion in the elk population. So then the elk were getting out of control, and then they had to shoot the elk. But because the elk were getting out of control, they were having less trees, because the elk would, use their antlers and knock over the trees. And then you had less home for the songbirds, and then less home for the birds, and less trees led less wood for the beavers to make dams. And then that led to some erosion of the streams, and that led to changes in kind of the amphibious population there as well. So they started to see all these different effects. And so they started with shooting the wolves. And then you start, attacking this problem symptom by symptom, to use an analogy from medicine. And what they found is it didn't work until the late 90s. What they did is they introduced, I think, 13 wolves one year and 14 wolves the next year. So it was, that's roughly that number, but it's called 27 wolves in a 2.2 million square acre park. And what they found is it totally changed the behavior of the elk, because not only did those wolves eat some elk, but it changed their behavior. So instead of sitting in the plains and knocking over those trees and destroying the habitats for songbirds, the elks tended, even if they weren't killed, stay in the wooded areas that were difficult to get to. So that changed the behavior, allowed the regeneration of the trees, allowed the songbirds to come back, allowed the beavers to have the wood they needed to make the dams, headed off the erosions of the streams, changed the population of a lot of the muskrats and some of the animals that use the stream life for that. So it's that one change, there's that one small change that had a drastic impact. So that's the idea of the Yellowstone principle. So then what I go through is, it's, how can we use that same principle in health? And it's basically the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So, you guys have done a great job talking about this, Dr. Phillip. You're a cardiologist saying get off your operating table, and you're doing it by addressing diet of the whole, right? You're talking about the whole health. So you can look at one symptom in just a piece, or you can look at that wholeness and interconnection of that. And that plays out on different levels. So one of the ways is when you see a symptom in the body, well, that's just one symptom, doesn't mean necessarily that's where the problem is. So it's better off to look at the whole. You can also look at people who are part of a community, who have connection, have whole health of spirit, mind, body. They have much better outcomes in their physical health, heart health, mental and emotional health. And you can also look at foods. The healthiest foods are the whole foods, right? The foods we're really talking about are fractionated, refined, chlorinated, brominated, genetically modified. The more fractionated the food, the more different it is from how it was grown, the more problematic it is. And probably to give just one specific example on that, it would be sugarcane, right? Sugarcane, as it grows, is 90% fiber, full of minerals, full of manganese and magnesium and zinc, and full of B vitamins. And guess what? You need zinc to make insulin. You need magnesium and manganese to drive the processing of sugar. The fiber blunts the insulin spike and the blood sugar spike from the sugar. And the B vitamins are really important for basically energy metabolism in the body. So inside that sugar cane, you have everything you need to properly digest sugar. And you could not eat enough sugar cane to get what the average American does. In fact, if you did, you'd have over 300 grams of fiber. So the average recommendation is 20 to 25 grams. So you'd have, what would that be, 14 to 15 times the fiber. So just imagine you'd be on the toilet for a while before you ever got close to eating that much that much sugar cane. So that's one example of when we eat foods in their whole form, they have all the pieces necessary. And the more you fractionate it, the more you get close to a poison or a toxin than you do a food.
Yeah, and it also really brings up, kind of that law of unintended consequences, where you look at something that would seem to make sense. The wolves are eating the cows, so let's get rid of the wolves. We're seeing these plaques in people's arteries that have cholesterol in them. So let's get rid of the cholesterol and let's stop eating cholesterol. And that led us down the whole, processed food, high carbohydrate, low fat diets that have been, such a disaster for us.
Yeah.
And again, another, just great meta concept that we fail to apply in medicine. Getting a little higher level on the book, just give us an overview of why you wrote it.
Yeah, thank you. The reason I wrote the book, and we talked a little earlier, it was a heck of a journey. Just telling Jack, and we talked earlier, that took 5.5 years, and it was definitely a labor of love, as it kind of goes that way. But the reason I wrote it was basically it just hurts my heart and hurts my soul to see people suffering for not realizing. I think the biggest issue with our idea of health is we actually don't understand what health is. Most people accept the disease care model of allopathic medicine, allopathic meaning drugs and surgery. Most people accept the disease care model of allopathic medicine as health. The only problem is it's not, as you know, and many of your audience knows, but it's not health. It's treatment of symptoms. So the question is, if we don't want to, another principle, you just can't be healthy and sick at the same time. So if you're,
seems obvious.
It seems real simple. So you can either focus on handling the sickness, or you can focus on being healthier. But the healthier you get, by definition, you're going to have less symptoms. But the problem is, what the heck is health? Right? How do we define that? Right? Most people define health as I don't have any symptoms, I'm fine. Unfortunately, I think 50% of the time, the first symptom of heart disease happens to be a heart attack. Yeah. Right? So we can't always rely on that. Sometimes we can have cancer grow in our body for 5, 10, 15, 20 years before we find it out. So we can't always rely on just symptoms as signs that we're healthy. So what I wanted to do in the book is not focus on the Titanic, but focus on the lifeboat. And the question was, what are the principles that as we can apply in our life that will help us create health? And then by definition, as we got healthier, we could be less sick. Because I think the biggest issue most people have around health is the mindset around not understanding really what it is or not knowing how to apply it. Because if we don't know how to apply it, then it's like the latest miracle pill or supplement that comes on the market, or the latest fad diet, or the latest, YouTube personality or YouTube ad that sounds good for 3 minutes selling something, sounds interesting, and they can be quite helpful. But the question is, do we understand what health is? And if you do, there's basic timeless principles that our bodies have been around here for a while. And I kind of look at it through that lens. Like, how does this fit with, evolution? How does this fit with our last 20 years or 50 years or 100 years? Because it has to at least make sense to me around that time horizon for it to be health. So that was the idea, is really look at that and basically try to help my patients even more, and try to reach people who may never come find me and never see me, but just give them that positive kind of paradigm shift, or update the software operating system around what health is so they can have better results.
Well, I'll just ask the question. Normally, when we have one of these, let's call it a redemption story. I had this problem. Actually, it's Joseph Campbell's hero's journey story, isn't it?
Sure.
I had this problem. No one was able to solve it. I got sick and tired and fed up and figured out how to solve it myself. There's like this pivotal moment, like where the angels descend, the choirs sing, the lights come on. And I didn't get that from your book. What I got was more of a sense of, this was not all of a sudden I had the answer and everything got better in a hurry, which is kind of what I think we're kind of wired to want. That fix the problem, doc, make it all go away. Did I read that right?
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I was flashing through. I took writing classes and was trying to layer in the hero's journey into a nonfiction book. Was a battle for about 2 years of that process. So I'm having flashbacks to Joseph Campbell's work and some of the stuff I did around that. Yeah, you're right in terms of, so I guess what I found through it is that, there probably the one pivotal moment I read through that book is when I was going to that place that called themselves the Mayo Clinic for headaches, and they put me on a drug called Elavil, which is an antidepressant. They put me on a low dose and talked about it being a headache prevented. They put me on a muscle relaxer. They put me on a pain reliever. And I had never felt more depressed in my life. I didn't know maybe what the words were, but I didn't feel right mentally as I was on it. And there were some real dark days and dark nights while I was on that medication. And, there was one night where you're sitting there contemplating that, or making the clear decision, I'm not going to go on living like this. Like, it's just, and I didn't know what that meant at that time, but I knew what I was doing, having a headache nonstop every moment, every day for 2 years wasn't living. So, so there's that piece, but that was more as a patient. I mean, I think as a doctor, my experience has been there's always another level or layer to it, right? I mean, understanding diet, and then there's a depth to that. And then you can understand different conditions, cardiovascular, and then there's on allergens, and then you're going into autoimmune disease, and then you're going into cancer, and then you're going into, and obviously, and my profession as a chiropractor and my license, I'm not allowed to treat anything. It's all supporting the body as you go through that. But, and then COVID comes along, and what can we do for the patients going through that? And then you've got long COVID. So it's just a continuous evolution of learning. And then after that, then there's, the mental side of health, and then the spiritual or emotional side of health. So I think for me, there was, many, many breakthroughs on the way, but also always looking at the next layer and what's driving that. And I think a constant, push on my own, keep learning, keep understanding, keep learning, keep diving into it. So I think it's been kind of a cyclical process like that for me, kind of as a practitioner, I guess.
Bill, isn't, and I'm looking at it as an outsider, but it looks to me like the allopathic world of medicine, with its hyper specialization, is maybe not consciously, intentionally ruling out these layers of health. But functionally, if you have, if you've got a problem in your left hand, then you go to a left-handed doctor. Whereas if you have a problem in your right hand, there's an entirely different specialist for right hands. And there doesn't seem to be the kind of view of health being a multi-layered thing. Am I perceiving that correctly?
Yeah, no, I think it's one of the features of the system that works against itself. And again, I can admit, my personal, failings there. I viewed myself as a heart surgeon, and so my job was to do the surgery on the heart. It wasn't really, I wasn't really supposed to think about, well, why is this patient here needing the surgery in the first place? And, of course, when I did start thinking about that, that has led me, down a completely different pathway.
You're now a heretic.
Yeah, exactly. And, so I very much agree that, one of the things we do need to change in medicine is this, siloed specialization, ultra specialization that keeps us from seeing the whole picture, and how something like nutrition might affect the medical issues that we're trying to deal with every day.
Jeff, one of the things that really resonated with me was, I can't remember, it was where you talked about the golden
U.
The golden U, or maybe in your closing, but you talked about a whole bunch of things that we can do to be healthier, none of which fall into what most of us think of as healthcare. And I'm paging through the book here trying to find it, obviously. I think it's probably in the golden U. So kind of wrap us up with your thinking behind the golden U principle, which you subtitled "The Power of the Infinite You." I love that.
Yeah, well, I think it's going back to this idea of, one of the things I found really fascinating was working with patients and the individualization that would show up in someone's diet or supplement needs. And specifically, I couldn't understand why some people might, not need any whole food vitamin support or support of iodine, and others might need hundreds, 10, 50, 100 times as much as someone else. I couldn't understand it. I saw clinically, I saw the patients getting better, and I had just very clear evidence in my office and with patients and talking to other doctors that was 100% the case. But how could that be possible? Right? That was kind of the idea I looked at. So there's a gentleman named Roger Williams. So he was a PhD researcher and professor at the University of Arizona. He discovered 2 B vitamins, and his brother discovered a third. So this guy was like a serious biochemist, and he wrote a book called Biochemical Individuality. And basically what he said, to paraphrase it very quickly, is individual nutrient requirements can vary up to 100x person to person. So the amount of vitamin C I need versus what
10,000%.
Yeah, 100 times is 10,000. Yeah, you're exactly right. 10,000%. Yeah. So they don't show that on the back of your supplement bottle or on the back of the, stick of butter and the nutrient requirements that you see there. Yeah. So let's break this down and make this real practical. We saw this all the time on COVID, right? Loss of taste and smell. What is it? 99% of the time, it's a zinc deficiency. Zinc is involved in taste, zinc is involved in smell, and zinc's involved in the inhibition of viral replication. And people were doing really well with high doses of zinc because guess what? The body is super intelligent. If you had a choice between inhibiting viral replication of the body, in English, stopping a virus, or being able to taste and smell, what your body's going to choose. It's going to choose to stop the virus every time. Who cares if your coffee doesn't smell good for a couple of weeks?
So what you're saying is that loss of taste and smell is actually just a side effect of the body protecting itself from the virus?
The intelligence of the body. Yeah. And I'm going to say, I'm going to couch that by saying 95 to 99% of the time.
Right.
And the way you can solve that is, there can be other weird things of it, but absolutely. And then, so you could see, but because what did we learn about COVID? Like this was true even in March and April of 2020. What we knew 100% at that, even on the early research, is the healthier somebody was going in, the healthier they were going out. Obese, diabetic, heart disease, cancer. If you had that going into COVID, even the early data out of China said your chances, of death or not making it or bad things happening are, 6 to 10 times higher or more, right? That was really clear at the beginning. So, but basically, what do we, now we can see it with zinc. You can see it with, anyway, you can go with omega-3 status. You can go with a whole bunch of different factors as you go through that. But basically, so I'm just trying to figure out where we go. We were going on nutrient requirements can vary 100x person to person. And, pregnant women need more of everything, right? Power lifters need more protein, right? People are more active may need this. People whose mind race, they need more relaxing B vitamins. Mind racing, inability to sleep. That's basically like your body, your red line in your car. So you're gonna need to fill it up with gas and with gas and change the oil a little more often. So those are relaxing B vitamins, calcium, relaxing B vitamins, as well as relaxing minerals, calcium, magnesium, manganese, potassium, things like that. But anyway, you can go through, vitamin C usage goes up to 75x when somebody has a cold or fighting something off. Huge amounts of stress. One of the things kind of in your wheelhouse is, and I don't know if I'm speaking, you can correct me on the finer points of this, but something called exercise-induced cardiomyopathy, which is a big word, which basically means you can actually over-exercise and get a flabby heart. So you can see it sometimes in extreme, these are often like extreme athletes, marathon runners, extreme triathletes, but people who really push the heart. And basically what happens in that is you're burning up B vitamins, and B vitamins are really, really important for the integrity of the heart. So things like stress, alcohol use, lots of sugar, and excessive exercise can deplete B vitamins. So anyway, I give that as a whole story to say the individual nutrient requirements can vary tremendously person to person. So how does that make sense? Because we all roughly have the same body, right? We're all like 99% genetically the same or whatever that is. And obviously epigenetics plays a big part of that. But I think looking at our individual response to stress and looking at our individual response to the world we're going through, and you can see it with, even something as simple as, eyewitnesses in a car crash or a fight with your spouse. Two people can have very different experiences of exactly that same things that's there. We can perceive the same event and have very different reactions from a stress perspective. And that can actually drive our physiology, change our nutrient requirements, and change what we need from a dietary perspective. So what I wanted to look at with that principle is actually how can we recognize that and realize that, the cause or a lot of the cause of the body and what's pushing those levers can actually lie outside the body. And that's that whole idea of spirit, mind, and body. And basically what can be happening on a mental, emotional, or spiritual level can change what's happening in the body and drive inflammation, drive stress, drive certain symptoms, change our nutrient requirements. But you can see changes in the body when the cause stays outside there, if that makes sense. So encouraging me as a practitioner to look at patients' spirit, mind, body. And you'll see that, and actually the CDC will say up to 75% of all disease or all doctors' visits are caused by stress, right? In medical textbooks will say, 60 to 80% of all disease is caused by stress. So I had to look at myself in the mirror and say, if that's true, what the heck am I doing about it? Right. So that pushed me to investigate more of the mental, emotional, spiritual aspects of health and how they impact physically in a very real way in our body.
I would love to spend, 3, 4, 5, 6 episodes going down that particular rabbit trail.
Yeah.
How all these non-physical things manifest themselves in our physical health.
Sure.
We're at an hour here, so I don't want to push it too hard.
I'll give you one last nugget.
Cool.
I'll give you one last nugget. There's a gentleman named McClare at Oxford, and it was in the 70s. I think it was 74. He said the body is 10 to 100 times more sensitive to non-material stimuli, light, energy, vibration, than they are to physical stimuli, such as nutrients, neurotransmitters, hormones. So the example I like to give to
Say that in
patients,
English.
yeah, so the body can be up to 10 to 100 times more sensitive to non-physical things than to physical things like nutrients, foods, hormones. So this means if you ever walked into a party and you saw someone on the other side of the room you absolutely just didn't want to talk to and your heart sank, or you're around great friends and you just feel your energy level come up immediately, nothing physically changed. There's an emotional and an energetic change that happened that triggered something very physical and real in the body. So your body can be up to 100 times more sensitive to those changes in your environment energetically than it is to something physical like cortisol, like insulin, like eating a cookie or broccoli. So as we peel back this idea of, how real is the physical, right? And that's, like you said, 6th episode gets us started on that. But there is some interesting hard science on the power of the energetic realm to impact the physical body. Anyway, that was one coming out of Oxford almost 50 years ago, but up to 10 to 100 times more sensitive to energy than it is to things we can touch.
Bill?
I was just going to say we might have to poll the audience and see if we want to start expanding this into a Rogan type show in 3 hours with all these interesting guests that we're getting on.
My gosh.
But yeah, amazing conversation. Tell people where they can find you, where they can get the book, so that they can achieve their golden you and get their timeless youth.
Yeah, great. Just kind of reset the operating system, kind of click it back in to understand what health is. So that's great. Thank you so much. So the book is Timeless Youth. It's YOU, little t, little h, emphasis on the you. Basically, all healing begins with you, or the number one truth in your health is you. So that's kind of where that title came from. So you can find it any bookstore. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it timelessyouthbook.com. You can find it there as well. If you have a favorite local bookstore, you can get it there. Or if they don't have it, you can ask them to order it. It'll be anywhere books are sold. So that's where that is. You can follow me if you need any. If you want to contact me, probably easiest way is Instagram. You can find me on my name, Jeff Crippen, Crippen. And yeah, it was a pleasure to be with you guys and spend some time with your audience and some like-minded people on the journey. I really enjoyed listening to the podcast, enjoyed some of the amazing guests you've had on, and thank you for the opportunity to join you today.
Well, I'm going to put you on the list of amazing guests that we have, and I want to speak to our audience now. This book, I recommend this book without reservation. It's not a how-to book like many of the types of things that folks are drawn to. It's not how to fix this particular problem. It's a little more. It's more a meta problem solver. 5 different principles that if you can adopt these and adapt to these, thinking about your health differently, you've got a much better chance of getting healthy and staying healthy. That's regardless of what particular physical situation you might be dealing with. All right, get out there and buy it, folks. Go ahead and subscribe. We drop a new episode every Tuesday at midnight Pacific time. For Dr. Philip Ovadia, Dr. Jeff Crippen, I'm Jack Heald. We'll talk to you next time.
Chances are you wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you didn't need to change your life and get healthier. So take action right now. Book a call with Dr. Ovadia's team. One small step in the right direction is all it takes to get started. Contact us at ifixhearts.com/talk. That's ifixhearts.com/talk.